Hey, it's Zoe. I have a question. How do you deal with failure? I think we really need to rethink failure. It's not just about the raw mindset that we need to get our head around. I think we need to fail with a framework. Let's do it.
Welcome to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast, your source of strategies and insights to make you a better leader. Influence, improve, inspire.
My friend Donna McGeorge, who is the author of the 25-Minute Meeting, you should get it if you haven't got it already, has a great series of videos called Permission Granted. And I think I did that with my best Australian accent, permission granted, because we don't say granted in Canada, we say permission granted. So she was granting and granting all over the place. And what I love about this series is it was really about the dedicated commitment to being yourself and really choosing a life that you want to live. So she had some amazing examples of things that you could give yourself permission to do, be, and have. Things like just permission to be, or permission to go on holiday, or permission to enjoy the weather, or permission to get started. There's a lot of things that we don't give ourselves permission for. Permission to relax. That's a big one I get with leaders all the time. Permission to have a day off. Another one I hear all the time from leaders. Permission to turn off. These are all huge ones. And it's something we're going to take a deep dive on at the Unconference, the Edge of Leadership Unconference in March next year. Did you like that subtle plug? There's going to be another plug at the end, so I'll leave it to that. Anyway, her Permission Granted series really got me thinking about this. Well, we need also permission to fail. And if you're in business, you hear this all the time. There's a big lexicon out there in the business community about failure. And it's not necessarily a new idea. You know, this idea about fail forward fast. And if you've been in business, there's a lot of leading business leaders, like the head of IBM, who said that you need to double your rate of failure if you're going to be successful. I've got a whole bunch of quotes on the show notes page, the podcast show notes page, which is zoerouth.com/podcast/failure. And they're instructive, but basically they mean whatever happens, make use of it. You can learn from your failures and so on. Even in my own community, the Thought Leaders Business School community, we're taught that we're going to launch 4 projects a year and we can expect half of them to fail. Now, when you first move into an entrepreneurial world, this can seem confronting if you're not used to it. Like, ooh, half the things I'm going to do are going to be failures. Yes, because we treat them as experiments. And even Tony Robbins says, there is no failure, there are just results. Except he says it with the hardcore Tony Robbins expression. And I think it's an interesting concept to get our heads around. Leticia Gasca has a great TED Talk on this. And she started a business called the Failure Institute, which is a research institute into failure and how it happens and how we deal with it. And she was interested because she had her own entrepreneurial failure and felt like a failure. And I think that's what we often fear with failure, is that we feel like we are a failure, not that we've experienced a failure. And she started this habit or this gathering called the F Up Fridays. I'm not going to swear on the podcast, but that's basically what it is. And that merged into the Failure Institute. So she started studying this whole idea of failure and what we can learn from it. Now, I think there's an interesting parallel to failure, which is rejection. And I love Zha Jing. What a great name, right? Zha Jing has a fabulous TED Talk that came out in 2015 called What I Learned from the 100 Days of Rejection. Now, failure and rejection are slightly different. Failure is associated with external things. So whether you put in some effort, the market didn't buy your product, maybe there's an upturn or downturn in the economy, etc., you can always look to external factors. Rejection feels incredibly personal. And this is what he wanted to explore. And after an early childhood experience of rejection in his school days, where all these kids lined up and the teacher said, we're going to give compliments to everybody. Well, after going through about 35 kids in the class, there's 5 left, and he was one of them. People had run out of compliments, and so he had to sit down without a compliment, and it kind of burned him. He just felt really rejected, so he ran from rejection. He wanted to cure himself from this fear of rejection, of needing to be accepted. And so he designed this experiment, 100 Days of Rejection. He made a list of 100 things that he was going to go and ask for and expecting rejection so that he could desensitize himself to rejection. It's a fabulous TED Talk. I'm going to put a link to the show notes. And in it, what he discovered is some critical things. And one of the critical things he discovered is that if somebody says no, rather than just thinking that it's something to do with you, you just pause and say, may I ask why? Why are you not accepting my request? And one of the examples he gives is that he went up to a stranger's door and knocked on the door and said, can I plant this flower in your backyard? Which is very strange, isn't it? For a stranger to say, can I plant a flower in your backyard? And the guy at the door said no and looked a bit weird. And so Zhang said, using his new information and his new insight, said, may I ask why? And the guy said, well, I've got a dog in the backyard. It'll dig up everything, including your flower. So I can't really plant anything in the backyard. But if you go across the way and talk to Connie loves flowers. So he did. And Connie embraced him and planted the flower. So that little magical phrase, may I ask why, is a window into deciphering people's reasons for not accepting your request, which as an entrepreneur, as a business person, is critical. This is understanding what it is about your request or your offer that people don't like, don't enjoy. There's so much information that could be had there, and I think this is one of the things I'm going to adopt for myself and do it more rigorously, because I get a lot of no's in my work, as any business owner does, in terms of you reach out, you make offers to people, and they say no, rather than say, okay, and just shut down about it. Just add, may I ask why? It could be a timing issue. Quite often it is in my business. Or it might be it's not a match to what they're doing. It's not a match to their particular needs at this time. And the idea is not to take it as a personal insult, but to learn from it and to take whatever information they have to tweak your offering if necessary, or to go and ask different people or different types of people. So it's always a huge opportunity to improve, but we don't often feel that way. Some of the research in Zhang's book, which is called Rejection Proof, he quoted some research that they realized that when people experience rejection, it releases opioids in your body. So a biochemical reaction of rejection. And rejection, if you remember, is basically a statement on our social inclusion, and belongingness is one of our core human needs, and it comes at one of the earliest stages of leadership maturity, and that need to belong to a tribe is hardwired into us, and it helps us feel safe and successful in life and work and in general going through the world. So if we ask for something and we are rejected, it's like a social exclusion, and that pushes all of our survival threats. So Zhang's research that he quotes says that the body releases opioids that are just like a physical trauma. Yeah. So if someone says no to you, you can experience it just like if someone had hit you over the head or punched you in the guts. And we often hear that, right? That rejection was just like a slap in the face, or a punch to the guts. I think I just gave you the story twice there. But we can experience it as a physical wound, if you like. So it's no wonder that we run from experiences or potential experiences that might include rejection. So it takes a lot of reframing in order to get to the point where we can actually embrace it. And that's the whole point. My key point about failure is that it's not just about treating it as feedback or treating it as results to examine, which is all about the rah-rah mindset piece, and all the quotes that I read are about that. It's not about whether you fail, it's how you get back up again. It's only a failure if you don't learn from it, which are all true. And I think we can put a framework around failure that will help us a lot. Now, there's two frameworks I think that we need to be mindful of. One are the technical frameworks around failure that we need to manage extremely well. I'm immersed in a program for the Rice Growers Association at the moment, and it's focused around governance, i.e. the responsibilities of directors. And one of the key things in the responsibilities of directors is managing risk. And I think these are really important frameworks to nail down in order to manage that kind of failure. So the two areas of risk I think are the most important are financial and safety. And safety comes in terms of physical safety, emotional, mental health, etc. So as a leader, we need to know what our thresholds are. What is an acceptable investment or loss when it comes to finances or even to safety? And it's an interesting one, right? So I think about this all the time. If I'm going to invest in a new project or marketing plan, it's like, okay, what am I prepared to see disappear out the window? What is an acceptable loss if it doesn't pan out? And we need to know what our thresholds are, because if we bet the house on an investment, say, for example, we need to be prepared to lose it. And a lot of people don't. They just take, and this is what my complaint is about the fail forward fast movement or notion is that it doesn't insinuate or take into account that we need to be mindful of our resources. We can't just throw everything at something as in a wild bet. We need to have parameters around that. And sensible entrepreneurs will manage those extremely well. Okay, you don't want to manage it so well that you don't take any risks, though. That's the whole thing. If we're afraid of losing something, like money, then we wouldn't experiment with anything, and we wouldn't get the information that we need from those experiments. Safety is another interesting one. I remember in conversation with my dad a few years ago. He lives in Summerside, Prince Edward Island. And Prince Edward Island is this tiny little island off the east coast of Canada. And it was quite isolated from the mainland, and you could only ever used to get to it by ferry, which took forever and was risky because of the weather and so on. So about 30 years ago, they decided to build what is now known as the Confederation Bridge, which is a 12.9 kilometer bridge from the mainland to PEI. That's huge. Like, that is a really massive engineering feat. And in my conversation with my dad, we talked about the construction. We were sitting at a cafe, and there was pictures of all the building of the bridge that lasted quite a while. And I think I couldn't find statistics on this, but a few people died in the construction of the Confederation Bridge. And my dad, who's an engineer, was very matter-of-fact about it. He said, well, in any major construction like that, you can expect a few deaths. And I was shocked by that. I'm like, really? Like, is that actually planned into the building plan? And I would say, no, I don't think any construction organization would allow for deaths as part of the normal par for course in building a large enterprise like that. Doesn't that seem nuts? Then I thought back to the Egyptians. They probably did plan for a lot of deaths of their slaves, and they're building the pyramids and so on. But we're not 3000 BC. We are 2018 at the time of recording this podcast. So what is acceptable loss? In construction, I would say any loss of life is not acceptable. And that's why there's occupational health and safety management that is so rigorous, because we don't see that risk of life is an acceptable loss, an acceptable risk, an acceptable failure, if you like. Interestingly, though, and Nassim Taleb, I think I pronounced his name properly, who wrote books like The Black Swan, talks about every failure makes things better, because with every failure and every death, we learn from it. Hopefully we learn from it. And so the world gets less risky and less painful as a result of these deaths. So he believes that no death is in vain, which I hope to agree with, as long as people are learning from what happened. And we could go down a rabbit hole discussing whether or not people are learning from stuff. But in any case, what is acceptable risk is the key part. So failing with a framework like that is really important. And those are the hard and fast frameworks, financial and safety. It's the other frameworks that are a little bit more fluid and rubbery, if you like. And these are the frameworks to do with assault to the ego and reputation. Those are other risks. And that's what we hear spoken to a lot when we talk about fail forward fast and having an experimental nature, is that we need to park our insult to ego when it comes to failure. And I think that's an important thing to consider. We can troubleshoot these, because all those risks to reputation and ego are all stories. You know, they're all stories we make up about what happens, and they're not necessarily true, and we can actually recover from them. So they can be fairly difficult, though, when we contend about what our choices are. We can choose to not take an action because we fear about the blow to our ego. It's why we don't ask people out on dates. It's why we don't ask for the promotion. It's why I haven't asked the author Jia Jing for a podcast interview, which the irony was hit me smack in the eye. So I'm going to actually, now that I've said it out loud, have to go back on his site and ask him if he'll come on my podcast. Otherwise, what have I learned from his lessons? Nothing. So this idea that we need to manage the story around our ego and reputation is critical. So what kind of framework can we use to troubleshoot the issues around ego and reputation? Two lessons. I think from Zhajing, we can use the phrase asking why. So this is how we manage the fear of rejection, that opioid traumatic experience of being rejected, and just ask why to get information. And whether it's a rejection or a failure, and they're a little bit different, we have the framework through which we see these experiences. We ask so we can learn. We try so we can grow. Isn't that a good phrase? I'm going to put that in the show notes too for you. Ask so you can learn. Try so you can grow. And this framework is the way that we troubleshoot the obstacles we have from ego and reputation. So in Boundless Leadership, it's really about the relentless pursuit of the possible. The relentless pursuit of the possible. Relentless means that we don't let things like ego and reputation and fear of rejection get in our way, and that we become relentless in peeling back the obstacles that we come across, because the possible is just so darn cool. So the Unconference, I promised you what did I promise you? A little advertising? Yeah. And here's my asking and for fear of rejection. There you go. Our launch tickets are still on sale. The launch ticket special ends in just 2 weeks, less than 2 weeks, on November 30th. So depending on when you're listening to this, of course, November 30th, 2018, launch tickets are done unless they sell out before that. And that means that you can get the tickets at less than half price at the moment, which is amazing. So the launch ticket prices are $900 for 2 days of deep insight about looking at your leadership and how you can go from being an achiever to an amplifier. So you can avoid so many of the pitfalls I've been talking about, fear of failure and burnout, and really transform who you are as a leader so that you can amplify your message and your impact. The other big piece of news around this is that we have secured Alessandra Edwards. Hurrah! She is a brilliant person. She was exceptionally useful to me and helpful to me when I was going through adrenal fatigue, and helped me reset my gut biome and get my energy back on track. I have a huge amount of respect and time for Alessandra, and she's coming to speak at the Unconference on the DNA of performance, and how when we know deeply what our DNA is all about, we can customize our productivity hacks and our biohacks so that we can make the most of our biology. Because there is not one size fits all. Not like the diet industry would let us believe all that. In fact, they're very much, that's what the diet books try and sell us. This is the one solution. Be paleo or be vegan or be whatever it is of the day. So Alessandra will be talking. If you want to check out the Unconference, I would love to have you there. It's for high flyers, big picture thinkers, and I would want you to become part of my community if that is you. You can check us out at the edgeofleadership.unconference.com.au, and the link will be in the show notes at zoerouth.com/podcast/failure. Phew. Well, I'd love to hear your thoughts on failure, what your experiences are with it, and if you have any words of wisdom. So sing out, send me an email, zoe@innercompass.com.au. And if you're loving the podcast, please rate me on iTunes. And thank you to everybody who has rated me on iTunes. It's awesome. I'm getting more ratings now, which is great, which means that this message and this show can get out to more people. And this is not about ego. This is about helping other people get the benefit of becoming boundless leaders, in relentless pursuit of the possible. So lots of cool things for you to go and explore and do. In the meantime, live well, lead well.